Imagine for a moment that you've been dealt the absolute worst hand in the game of civilization. You sit in the very heart of Europe, yet you have no access to the sea, no colonies to exploit, no oil, no gas, no gold mines, no diamonds. Your land is so mountainous and unforgiving that for centuries you couldn't even grow enough wheat to feed your own people. By every law of economics and geography, you should be a forgotten, poverty-stricken backwater, the kind of place people flee from, not the kind billionaires rush toward. But you are not poor. You are Switzerland. Today, this small nation boasts a GDP per capita north of $92,000, conceptually higher than that of the United States. They guard the world's wealth inside fortified vaults, they influence global commodity pricing, and they have engineered a level of stability that makes much of the world resemble a burning dumpster fire. Yet here is the uncomfortable truth that glossy travel brochures will never mention. Switzerland didn't become wealthy by crafting chocolate bars and cuckoo clocks. They didn't prosper by being nice. Switzerland built its fortune by mastering the darker mechanics of capitalism, mercenary warfare, laundering the dirtiest money on earth, and strategically positioning itself on both sides of history's most brutal conflicts. So take your passport and leave your morals at the door. Today, we are dissecting the 6 pillars of Swiss wealth. Welcome to the vault. 1. The blood export: how violence became capital. Let's begin with a history lesson that rarely makes it into classrooms. When you picture a Swiss citizen today, you probably imagine a courteous banker in a tailored suit, or someone hiking peacefully through alpine trails in lederhosen. But if you had lived in Europe during the 1500s, the sight of Swiss soldiers marching towards you would have been the most terrifying development of your day. Before they became bankers, the Swiss were Europe's most lethal killers, and not defensive warriors protecting their homeland hired guns. Here was the economic reality of life in the medieval Alps. You are a young Swiss man. Rocks surround you. Crops refuse to grow because the altitude is brutal. You share the land with 3 brothers and a single cow. Starvation isn't a possibility, it's the forecast. So what was the one resource Switzerland possessed in abundance? Men, hardened mountain men who understood discipline and knew exactly how to handle a pike. So they commercialized violence. This was no chaotic mob. The Swiss cantons, essentially their version of states, structured it into a state-sponsored industry known as the Reisläufer. They negotiated formal agreements, called capitulations, with foreign monarchs, primarily the French and the Spanish. Think of it as an early business-to-business transaction. Client: the King of France. Service required: destroy the Austrian army. Provider: the Canton of Bern. Payment: enormous quantities of gold up front, along with regulated wages for the troops. For centuries, this arrangement powered the Swiss economy. At the Battle of Marignano in 1515, Swiss fighters were effectively the Blackwater, or Wagner group of the Renaissance, just with better hats. Why does this matter for modern wealth? Capital accumulation. While the rest of Europe hemorrhaged money funding wars, Switzerland was profiting from them. Cantons skimmed a percentage from soldiers' earnings. Officers, often members of aristocratic Swiss families, returned home, carrying massive chests filled with French gold and Spanish silver. This flood of hard currency poured into a region that had almost nothing to purchase. Remember rocks and cows. The result was a staggering liquidity surplus. Mountains of cash, nothing to spend it on. So what do you do with excess capital? You lend it. The shift from mercenary to banker wasn't a career change. It was a business model pivot. The same elite families that organized mercenary regiments began lending that blood-soaked money back to the very monarchs they once fought for. They discovered something profound. Fighting wars pays well, financing wars pays even better, and you don't get impaled by a pike. By the time Swiss neutrality firmly took hold in the 19th century, they had already accumulated centuries' worth of European gold. They didn't begin from zero. They began with a war chest, financed by the export of death. Lesson: when you lack natural resources, export a service, even if that service terrifies the world. 2. The silence of the gnomes, the invention of banking secrecy. Now we have capital. But possessing money alone doesn't make you extraordinarily rich. To achieve that, you must become a magnet for other people's wealth. You need a unique selling proposition. Switzerland's USP became elegantly simple. We will never tell anyone you are here. Now, There's a persistent myth that Swiss banking secrecy stretches all the way back to the Middle Ages. While discretion was always part of their culture, the ironclad legal protection of secrecy is actually a modern creation born from a very specific crisis. Set the scene. It is the early 20th century. World War I has shattered Europe. Governments in France and Germany are broke and desperate for tax revenue. Naturally, they begin sniffing around to find out where their wealthy citizens are hiding their money. Spoiler alert, Geneva and Zurich. In 1932, a massive scandal erupted in Paris. French police raided the local office of a Swiss bank and uncovered a list containing more than 2,000 wealthy French citizens, politicians, generals, bishops quietly dodging taxes by parking their fortunes in Switzerland. The French government was furious. They threatened to expose everyone. At the same time, over in Germany, a man named Adolf Hitler rises to power. The Nazis begin enforcing strict capital controls. Their goal is simple: prevent Jewish families and political opponents from moving their assets out of the country. The Gestapo even dispatched spies into Swiss banks, posing as customers and attempting to trick tellers into confirming whether certain Germans held accounts. If a banker slipped, the account holder back home could be arrested, or worse. Switzerland was suddenly squeezed from both sides. Democratic France wanted to tax the money. Nazi Germany wanted to seize it. So, in 1934, Switzerland passed the Federal Banking Act, arguably one of the most profitable pieces of legislation in human history. Article 47 made it a criminal offense for a Swiss banker to reveal the identity of an account holder. Let that sink in. In most countries, breaking bank secrecy meant getting sued. In Switzerland, it meant going to prison. Overnight, Swiss banks transformed into a black hole for global capital. Who you were no longer mattered. A Jewish family trying to shield life savings from the Nazis? Switzerland was open. A Nazi official hiding looted gold from the Allies. Switzerland was open. A South American dictator? A tax-dodging American CEO? A Russian oligarch? Come on in. The 1934 law created something no other nation offered at the time: absolute anonymity. Which brings us to the deeply uncomfortable subject of Nazi gold. During the later years of World War II, the Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, looted hundreds of millions of dollars in gold from the central banks of occupied nations like Belgium and the Netherlands, and horrifyingly, from the victims of the Holocaust. Most institutions refused to touch it. Swiss banks did not. The Swiss National Bank and commercial institutions exchanged that stolen gold for Swiss francs, the only reliable currency Germany could use to purchase tungsten, steel, and machinery from neutral countries and keep its war machine running. Statistically, an estimated 85% of all gold traded by Nazi Germany during the war passed through Switzerland. When the conflict ended, Switzerland defended itself behind the shield of neutrality. They argued they were simply conducting business. Decades later, under enormous international pressure, reparations were paid. But the economic advantage had already been secured. By the 1950s, Switzerland had become the unquestioned vault of the world, holding the assets of winners, losers, victims, and villains alike. Backed by immense gold reserves, the Swiss franc emerged as one of the most stable currencies on earth. The 1934 Banking Act didn't just protect privacy, it monetized trust. In a century where governments seized assets with alarming frequency, communism in the East, aggressive taxation in the West, Switzerland sold security, and they charged a premium for it. But here is where the real brilliance appears. They didn't simply hoard the money. They deployed that tidal wave of foreign capital to finance domestic industries at extraordinarily low interest rates. This is precisely why Swiss firms could pour resources into expensive research and development for pharmaceuticals and engineering. In essence, the world handed Switzerland its credit card, and Switzerland used it to construct a superpower. 3. The alchemy of necessity, high-value manufacturing. If your country is nothing but mountains with no access to the ocean, you have a logistics nightmare. Let's play a shipping game. Imagine you are a factory owner in 1850. If you manufacture locomotives in Switzerland, you must haul enormous, heavy trains across the Alps just to sell them. Transportation costs alone would bankrupt you. You cannot compete with the British or the Germans in heavy industry. You physically can't. So the Swiss discovered a simple formula that reshaped their destiny. Maximize value, minimize weight, They realized that if they imported 1 kilo of steel for a single dollar, they couldn't afford to turn it into a $2 horseshoe. The margins wouldn't even cover transportation. Instead, they needed to transform that $1 of steel into $10,000 worth of microscopic precision components. This is the theory of value density. Switzerland became the world's workshop for products that are tiny, complex, and incredibly expensive. It began with watches, but the origin story is more unusual than most people realize. It wasn't purely Swiss brilliance, it was partially the unintended consequence of religious restriction. In the 16th century, the reformer John Calvin banned the wearing of jewelry in Geneva. He considered it flashy, indulgent, and sinful. Suddenly, the city's jewelers were staring at their workbenches in panic. No rings, no necklaces, no gemstones, so they pivoted. Fine, if we can't make jewelry, we will make tools. They shifted toward producing watches because watches were classified as functional instruments rather than decorative luxuries. A loophole was all they needed. Fast forward to today. Everyone recognizes Rolex and Omega, but the real money isn't just in the watches. It's in the machines that manufacture the machines. Switzerland quietly dominates the global market for precision manufacturing equipment. If you are Apple and you need a robot capable of milling the aluminum shell of an iPhone within tolerances measured in microns, you are not purchasing that robot from a bargain factory. You are buying it from Switzerland. Look at companies like ABB or Schindler. You may not recognize their names, but they operate the skeleton of the modern world. Schindler, if you are standing inside an elevator right now, glance at the control panel. There is a surprisingly high probability it's Swiss. Their systems move roughly 1 billion people every single day. Nestlé, they mastered preservation science, figuring out how to take milk, which spoils within days, and convert it into chocolate, powdered formula, and condensed products that last for years. Again, increasing value, extending shelf life, making it exportable. This pillar revolves around niche dominance. The Swiss do not attempt to manufacture everything. They focus on producing the one critical component inside the engine that, if it fails, brings the entire machine down. That creates pricing power. Consider a fascinating case study. The ballpoint pen tip. A Swiss company called Micron builds the machines used to produce the tiny metal spheres at the tip of ballpoint pens. For decades, they maintained a near-global monopoly on the ultra-precise machinery required to make those balls perfectly round. That is the Swiss philosophy in its purest form. Don't make the pen, make the machine that produces the part of the pen nobody else has the capability to manufacture. 4. The pirate phase, the rise of Pharma. We've discussed blood, we've discussed secret vaults, we've discussed watches. Now let's talk about drugs. If you examine the Swiss stock market index, the SMI, you'll notice it is heavily dominated by three giants: Nestlé, Roche, and Novartis. Roche and Novartis rank among the largest pharmaceutical companies on Earth, both headquartered in Basel, a city positioned strategically along the Rhine River at the border of France and Germany. Why Basel? Was it the fresh air? The water? No. It was because, in the late 19th century, Switzerland behaved like a pirate state. This is a chapter the Swiss rarely advertise. During the 1800s, Germany was the chemical capital of the world. German firms pioneered synthetic dyes, the compounds responsible for turning fabrics vivid shades of blue, red, and violet. Companies like BASF held strict patents protecting their formulas. Switzerland, however, did not enforce patent protections until 1907. So Swiss entrepreneurs adopted a remarkably direct strategy. They crossed the border into Germany, studied the patents, sometimes bribing factory workers, memorized the chemical processes, returned to Basel, and manufactured identical products. Because they avoided the enormous costs of research and development, they could undercut German prices. They were, quite literally, the original intellectual property pirates. The Germans were furious. They labeled Switzerland a state of robbers. Eventually, mounting international pressure forced Switzerland to introduce patent laws in 1907. But here is the clever twist. The legislation was largely shaped by the Swiss chemical industry itself. It protected their new inventions while conveniently ignoring the knowledge they had already appropriated. Once the dye industry generated serious capital, the Swiss executed yet another pivot. They realized that the same chemical expertise used to create dyes could be adapted to produce medicine. Blue pigment evolved into antiseptics. Chemical separation techniques became tranquilizers. Today, the Basel pharmaceutical cluster functions as the Silicon Valley of biotechnology. But this success carries a darker edge. The relentless pursuit of profit has occasionally produced catastrophe. The Sandoz chemical spill, 1986. Imagine waking up to discover that the Rhine River, one of Europe's most important waterways, is running blood red. On November 1st, 1986, a warehouse owned by Sandoz, now part of Novartis, caught fire. Firefighters poured massive amounts of water onto the blaze. That water, mixed with roughly 1,351 tons of pesticides and mercury, then streamed directly into the Rhine. The result was ecological devastation. Nearly all aquatic life, across hundreds of kilometers, died. Eels, salmon, entire ecosystems erased. Did it stop the industry? No. Fines were paid. Reputations were repaired. Companies merged and grew even larger. Today, Swiss Pharma acts as a powerful economic hedge. When recessions strike, consumers might postpone buying luxury watches, but they do not stop purchasing cancer treatments. Even in a downturn, Switzerland gets paid. Let me know in the comments, was it fair for Switzerland to build an industry on copied German patents? Or was it simply ruthless strategic intelligence? 5. The Invisible Empire, the commodity giants. Walk through the small Swiss town of Zug and you will notice something unusual. Plenty of Porsches, immaculate streets, glass office buildings with bland signage bearing names you've probably never heard before. Glencore, Vital, Trafigura, Gunfor, Mercuria. You have likely never purchased a product directly from any of them. They don't run flashy commercials. They don't chase social media attention. But if these 5 companies stopped operating tomorrow, your car would run out of fuel. The lights in your home would flicker off. Half the world would struggle to eat. This is the 5th pillar, the commodity trading hub. Here is one of the most astonishing statistics in this entire story. Switzerland has no oil wells, no copper mines, no coastline for shipping. It produces very little grain, yet roughly 35% of the world's oil, 60% of its metals, and half of its grain are traded through Switzerland. How? By positioning itself as the broker of the planet's resources. This industry was largely shaped by one man, a figure so controversial he makes the Wolf of Wall Street look tame. His name was Mark Rich. During the 1970s, the global oil market was dominated by the Seven Sisters, massive corporations like Exxon and Shell that controlled everything from extraction to the gas pump. Mark Rich saw an opportunity. If he could negotiate directly with dictators and state governments that actually owned the oil, he could bypass the corporate giants and create a spot market. So he set up operations in Zug, drawn by extraordinarily low taxes, effective corporate rates hovering around 8 to 10%, and more importantly, a Swiss government largely indifferent to whom he conducted business with. While much of the world imposed sanctions on apartheid South Africa, Mark Rich sold them oil. When the United States banned trade with Iran during the hostage crisis, Rich bought Iranian crude. He traded with Castro's Cuba. He traded with the Soviet Union. Eventually, he became the most wanted white-collar fugitive in FBI history. Prosecutor Rudy Giuliani indicted him on 65 criminal counts. Rich fled to Switzerland, where authorities politely told the FBI to get lost. Why? Because tax evasion wasn't considered a serious crime under Swiss law at the time, and violating foreign sanctions wasn't illegal domestically. Mark Rich lived comfortably in his Swiss mansion until Bill Clinton controversially pardoned him on his final day in office. But the legacy endured. Mark Rich's company eventually evolved into Glencore. Today, these traders function as geopolitical chess masters. When a nation like Chad or the Republic of Congo runs out of cash, they don't always go to the IMF. They go to a trader in Geneva. The trader says, "Here is $500 million up front. In exchange, you grant us the rights to your oil exports for the next 5 years." It's called pre-financing, essentially a payday loan for entire countries. This mechanism allows Switzerland to extract wealth from the natural resources of some of the poorest nations on Earth without ever digging a single hole. They move contracts. They arbitrage prices. They capture the spread. So the next time you admire a pristine Swiss lake, remember the money preserving that view may very well have originated from an open-pit copper mine in Zambia or an offshore rig near Russia. If you had the opportunity to earn $1 billion trading perfectly legal oil with a dictator, would you take it, or would your morals intervene? Be honest in the comments. 6. The Porcupine Strategy Monetizing Paranoia. We've talked about offense, mercenaries, secrecy, financial maneuvering, intellectual theft. Now we need to discuss defense. You cannot serve as the world's piggy bank if people believe someone can simply walk in and steal it. Switzerland is wealthy because it is arguably the safest place on earth. But that safety isn't rooted in peace alone. It is rooted in deterrence in becoming a porcupine. During World War II, Switzerland found itself surrounded by Axis powers. Hitler despised Switzerland. He reportedly called it a pimple on the face of Europe, and even drafted plans to invade an operation known as Tannenbaum. But the invasion never came. Why? Because the Swiss made one thing unmistakably clear. The cost of attacking them would far outweigh any possible reward. They developed a strategy called the National Redoubt. The idea was brutally simple. If Germany invaded, the Swiss army would not waste energy defending the borders. Instead, they would withdraw deep into the high Alps. Entire mountains had already been hollowed out to house underground fortresses, hospitals, ammunition depots, and hydroelectric plants. Every major bridge, tunnel, and roadway leading into the country had been wired with explosives. At the push of a button, Switzerland could sever itself from Europe, trapping any invading army inside narrow valleys where snipers held the advantage. They were prepared to destroy their own infrastructure to ensure that an enemy would inherit nothing of value. In essence, they held their own nation hostage. Enter, and everything burns. That mentality never truly disappeared. Until very recently, Swiss law required nearly every home to include a nuclear fallout shelter. As a result, Switzerland still maintains enough bunker capacity to house roughly 114% of its population. If nuclear weapons were launched tomorrow, the entire country could theoretically vanish underground and survive. Meanwhile, in places like the United States or the United Kingdom, well, you know how that would likely go. Every Swiss male undergoes military conscription. After completing boot camp, many soldiers take their service rifle, typically a SIG, home with them. Hundreds of thousands of military-grade firearms sit quietly inside Swiss closets, yet the nation consistently reports one of the lowest crime rates in the world. So how does all of this translate into money? The answer is the safe haven premium. Investors despise uncertainty. Put your wealth in a US bank, and you worry about inflation eroding the dollar. Buy property in London, and political shifts or regulatory changes can threaten its value. But when you purchase Swiss francs, you are buying a stake in a fortress. The Swiss franc is widely regarded as a safe haven currency. Whenever global panic strikes 9/11, the 2008 financial crash, the COVID crisis, the war in Ukraine, investors rush to sell volatile assets and park their wealth in francs. That surge in demand keeps the currency exceptionally strong. At times, it has effectively given Switzerland a negative cost of borrowing. Investors have been so eager to secure their money inside Swiss institutions that they have accepted negative interest rates. Imagine walking into a bank with $1 million. The banker smiles and says, "Come back in a year and we'll return $995,000. And you reply, "Thank you. At least I know it will still exist." That is the ultimate flex of financial power. The world literally pays you to safeguard its wealth. This extraordinary stability attracts corporate headquarters from across the globe. Google, FIFA, the International Olympic Committee, and the World Economic Forum all operate from Swiss soil, not just because of taxes, but because they trust the country won't collapse, face invasion, or descend into revolution. Switzerland has monetized its own paranoia. It converted fear into a AAA credit reality. 7. The future cracks in the armor. For roughly 5 centuries, the formula worked almost flawlessly. But nothing lasts forever. Recently, the Swiss fortress has begun to show fractures. The most dramatic rupture occurred in March 2023. Credit Suisse, one of the twin pillars of Swiss banking, founded in 1856 to finance the nation's railways, collapsed. It was a humiliating moment. Years of scandals had eroded confidence. Spying on employees, facilitating money laundering for Bulgarian cocaine traffickers, and hemorrhaging billions through reckless financial bets. Eventually, trust evaporated. The government had no choice but to orchestrate an emergency shotgun marriage with its rival, UBS, to stabilize the economy. The episode proved something once considered unthinkable. Even Swiss banks are not invincible, and banking secrecy is no longer what it once was. The United States and the European Union eventually grew tired of losing tax revenue. Beginning around 2018, Switzerland was compelled to participate in the automatic exchange of information, sharing account data with foreign governments. If you are an American attempting to hide money in Zurich today, good luck. The IRS will likely know before you even finish your fondue. As a result, the dirtiest money has started migrating elsewhere: Dubai, Singapore, even cryptocurrency markets. But the Swiss are nothing if not adaptive. They can read the writing on the wall. That is precisely why they are pivoting toward what is often called Crypto Valley in Zug. Their ambition is to become the regulatory capital of the blockchain era. In other words, if they can no longer conceal your traditional currency, they are more than willing to help institutionalize your Bitcoin. Just as they once evolved from mercenaries into bankers, they are now attempting to transform from an old money vault into a next-generation technology hub. 8. Final thoughts. The Swiss paradox. So how did Switzerland become extraordinarily rich despite having virtually no natural resources? They understood something most nations overlook. The world's most valuable resources are not gold, oil, or land. They are trust, neutrality, and silence. Switzerland functions like a mirror, reflecting the true nature of the global system back at us. We criticize their morality. We grow angry that they safeguarded dictators' gold. We condemn their willingness to trade with pariah states. But who handed them that money? We did. Who purchases the oil they broker? We do. Who shelters their assets there? Our elite. Switzerland simply delivers a service the world desperately desires, yet publicly pretends to despise. A place where money outranks politics, where business remains business. They took a jagged, frozen landscape and engineered a utopia by performing the tasks no one else wanted to admit were necessary. They did not become wealthy through luck. They became wealthy by being indispensable to the powerful. So the next time you unwrap a piece of Toblerone, enjoy it. But remember the recipe: a little milk, a little cocoa, and 500 years of ruthless, brilliant, uncompromising capitalism. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps the algorithm, and quite frankly, I could use the ad revenue to cover my own bunker fees. I'll see you in the next one.